This is Jason Hartman. I'm in Dallas again and headed to Arizona later today. I just got off stage presenting to a big investor group here, and we talked all about so many things that we've covered on the show, but not the least of which is understanding that war between inflation and technology. With the Fed trying to get inflation under control and doing a pretty bad job at it because they kept the money supply so loose for so long, Jerome Powell was certainly right in the idea that inflation was transitory because of supply chain issues coming out of COVID. He was right for a while, but he just kept saying the same thing and probably thinking the same thing for way too long. But he should have taken away the punch bowl at the party and raised interest rates much more slowly. But, we are where we are. And it's interesting that just 5 months ago, Fannie Mae predicted interest rates at the end of this year at 5.6%, and that is extremely unlikely at this point. But we might see that by the first or second quarter of next year. Who knows? We just don't know. That's the problem with a centrally planned economy. It's just up to the central planners, and we just don't know what's going to happen. But we will see. But the point is that inventory is still very low. At the time of this recording, we have about 556,000 homes for sale in the U.S., normal being 1.2 million. And so that means that our inventory is only about 47% of where it should be. One of the things I said in my speech just a moment ago was I gave that kitchen sink example that I've shared with you. If you look at the kitchen sink, right, the faucet represents the new inventory coming on the market, the new listings, new properties for sale, and the sink, the basin of the sink represents the existing inventory, and the drain represents the buyer demand, the absorption rate of the properties. And basically what we have now is we have a sink that in a normal market would be full to the brim. In a bad market or a buyer's market, the sink would be overflowing, right? Normal would be full. The sink is only about 47% full right now. It is still much higher than the COVID lows, that era during the COVID lows. So we'll see what happens. We have a long way to go to where we get to a market that is in danger of a crash. We are quite far away from that still, but we will see how it goes. And to talk about that today, we have Mike Simonsen with us again today to talk more about the condition of the market, where we've been and where we're going. So let's go ahead and get to that. I guess first I'll mention thank you to all of you who joined our Empowered Investor Pro Zoom meeting yesterday. jasonhartman.com/Wednesday is where you can always register for our monthly Zoom meetings. And these are not webinars, they are Zoom meetings, so you have the chance to interact and ask questions as we're talking about cost segregation. If you missed that today, reach out to one of our investment counselors and they can fill you in on how to save taxes with really low cost segregation studies and learn about what that is and so forth. So go ahead and do that. Without further ado, let's get to Mike and talk about the condition of the market.
Really, the lesson here is how quickly we reset our comparison. So, rates have been at 7 for a few months. We're comparing to 7. And it's only a few months, right? We're not comparing to 5.5. We're not comparing to 3 from 2 years ago. We're comparing to 7. And so if home buyers have been shopping this spring and they're looking around, they're setting their expectations about what kind of home they can buy based on 7% mortgage rates.
Yeah.
And so it's only a few months of stability that then they go, okay, but if rates jump to 7.5, now they're frustrated. Right. And suddenly 6.5 looks like a bargain.
And by the way, I just want to say one thing about that, because a long time ago, I learned that when there's a little spike and when rates are volatile, it actually makes people fear loss and they do move right away. Like they all
you think, okay.
Quick, there's a small number.
There's like a window.
Your
like a window
right overall, no question. Yeah. Okay. But like just when there's that slight bump, when they go to 7.25, they get scared and they make a decision because they're fearful of loss. But then when it goes up too much, they just give up and resign themselves. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think you could see that it's an accelerant for a little bit of time.
Yeah.
We could see that in the end of March and April of 22. Everybody knew rates were climbing.
Yeah.
That was the moment when the most people were buying. They were scrambling to get the last of the deals in, and it was an accelerant. And then July 4th weekend of 22, everything went off a cliff.
Yeah.
Sellers stopped, buyers stopped. If you didn't have your house listed by June, you knew you missed the window. Like all of it hit the brakes and it was July 4th weekend and whoop, we're done. And so it was like an accelerant at first, but then it settles in.
Yeah.
We've been talking about overall inventory, unsold homes on the market. The other way to think about supply is how many sellers each week, new listings each week are happening. And what we've tracked here is each line here is a year, and it's the squiggly lines, like some weeks more, some weeks fewer new listings. And the dark red line is this year. We're recording this like the last week's, the data had Easter in it, and you can see there's a dip in the new listings there, 55,000 new listings this week. But each week all year long, the dark red line's higher than the light red. You can see growth in sellers all week long, and you can see it's starting to expand, which means, and I think this is also like we were just been talking about, where now sellers understand the world we live in. Last year, they were just dramatic changes in mortgage rates, and it's hard to make a decision. And now I'm more likely to be locked in. But now once I've settled in, okay, we're 2 years into higher rates, I can start to make decisions. And so, okay, I'm going to sell my house. So we can see new listings starting to climb every week, about 10, 15% more sellers each week than a year prior. The other takeaway when we look at the new listings volume is for the bearish argument. And the bearish argument is, things are unaffordable, and, those investors or the Airbnb, folks are going to start unloading their properties, and we'd see a flood of new listings.
Yeah,
and what
Nick
it hasn't happened.
He's always wrong.
Right. But that's the fear. And what we can do is if that's your hypothesis, you can watch the new listings each week. And what we can see right now is, so there's 55,000, 60,000, 65,000 new listings in a given week. But normally this time of year, there might be 80,000. So you can see the gray lines here. Those are past years. So there might be 80, 90, 100,000 new listings in a given week in the second quarter. And if you think about that, if there's 100,000 new listings in a week and 100,000 sales, that leads to 5.2 million for the year. Like, you could see how it comes out. And so we still have a very restrictive seller world, but it's starting to ease up.
One of the things that I think you might have to start doing, and it's going to be a pain, is depending on how far you go back, adjust your data for inflation, essentially. And I don't mean money inflation, but the population is larger. There are more homes in existence in the housing stock. So to do this completely right, you would have to take it on like a per capita type of concept, right? Because if there were 100,000 new listings a week 7 years ago, that is not equivalent to 100,000 listings per week today. And of course, there's much less than that today. There's only
55,000.
55,000. That's not that huge of a factor yet, but it's there, right?
And in fact, the per capita adjustment is something we've done. And it's actually, rather than doing it time-wise, it's a really interesting way to look at it, compare markets.
Mm-hmm.
So when the bubble burst in 2008 and 2009, basically what happens is you have fewer homes per capita, more people competing for available inventory. Prices are higher, right? And if there's more inventory per capita, prices are lower. And there's a nice linear relationship. So the tighter the market, the more expensive the homes. It's really clear. And then you'd get an outlier market in like 2008, you'd get like Vegas. They had way more homes per capita. And those were the markets that were poised to crash. And so you could use inventory per capita, or people competing per home, as an indicator for likelihood of price adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
So right now you can look, for example, San Francisco or Boston, which have 8 million people in each metro, and there's like 1,800 homes for sale in either of those markets, like for 8 million people. Right?
Nothing. Yeah.
Nothing. You go to Sarasota, Florida, and it's like, 2 million people, and there's 5,000 homes for sale. And so you have a real clear picture of which markets are more likely to have price declines in the coming year. And that per capita inventory is a really useful way to look at it.
Good point. I agree.
Yeah. So let's look at the sales rate. So I mentioned that sales are expanding this year. There's about 7% more homes in contract than a year ago. So homes that are in contract now in April, they're taking about 38 days in contract right now. So that means they're going to close in April and May. There were 65,000 new contracts pending this week. So these are the homes that are on the market. They take offers and they go into contract. And so they're in that contract escrow phase for, 30 or 40 days. 65,000 new those this week, including Easter weekend. So that'll jump next weekend and it'll bounce back up. And I'd love to see, we might have over 75,000 go into contract in the week that we're recording right now, which would be a nice growth both week over week and versus last year. Yep. And what that tells us is that each week we have more sellers and we have more sales taking place. And so this is just counting the new ones each week. And we're looking at single family homes here. So, you can see a few things that happen. The bulk of the sales happen April, May, June, right? Second quarter. Yep. The sales rate starts dropping off in July and dips big on the July 4th holiday. And you can see then in the fourth quarter is the fewest home sales that we have. And what we're interested in here is I'm interested in watching the new pendings climb, the single family homes climb towards 80,000. As you get another 20,000 condos and 100,000 per week that's over 5 million home sales in there. Like that's a starting to get healthier home sales market. We can see the growth here. Interestingly, there are other measures of home sales. For example, the Mortgage Bankers Association has their index of applications for purchase mortgages. And that one hasn't started really showing growth yet over last year. If your listeners pay attention to the MBA number, they may say, well, there's no home sales growth over last year yet. And it's still record few. But what we are probably seeing is a shift to cash buyers. Mm-hmm. And NAR, for example, reported that there are more cash buyers than any time since 2014, when there was still a lot of investors buying out distressed properties from the bubble burst. So a shift to cash buyers means the transactions are happening, but it doesn't show up in the mortgage data yet because they're not doing mortgages. Yeah, that makes sense. Some of the Southern California markets are actually significantly hotter right now,
right? I know,
because they're more cash dominated.
Yeah, right.
And so you can see that happening.
First of all, I want to just rewind a little bit here to what you were talking about, which is the number of sales and the number of pending sales, so closed versus pending, and then the number of new listings. It's totally okay if a lot of new inventory comes on the market, as long as the buyer demand keeps up with that level of inventory. So, Mike, you do a good job of speaking to that. I've seen you talk about it many times in the past. Can you just speak to it now?
So we had 55,000 new listings this week, and we have 65,000 new contracts pending. Okay,
so the inventory is in a deficit.
It dropped this week. Right? Yeah, so inventory dropped this week. The available inventory dropped. We had more buyers than sellers this week. Right. So yes, we can absolutely see that happening. We should expect that. Inventory, we want inventory to rise in the spring. We want more sellers to happen. Last year we had such a supply constrained market. In March of last year, if there's only 50,000 new listings in a week, it's hard to get 60 or 70,000 sales because the houses aren't there. And so we want that new listings volume to pick up a little bit. But again, we also want to make sure that the sales rate is picking up. And because if it's going the other direction, that's a signal, that we're getting supply and not demand. That has implications on thinking about prices in the future, and, price is going to head up or down. Those are absolutely trends that we want to keep our eyes on.
One thing to remember is from your good old accounting class in college, right? Which is FIFO and LIFO, right? First in, last out, last in, first out, all of that stuff. And the point being that some of this housing inventory will never sell. there is a certain, probably fairly small amount of the inventory, maybe less than 20%, that is just people like experimenting. They're just fooling around. They're overpriced. Their houses are in such terrible condition. They're never going to sell. There's always that element in every market, because even during the COVID era, when inventory was insanely constricted, there were still 240,000 homes for sale, right? And so there were just, there wasn't 1.2 million like we need to be normal, but there's always, some, and we're not tracking the last in, first out, first in, last out concept here. We're just talking overall aggregate,
Yeah. And, in the hot markets, some of those junkier properties, they get bought. Right?
Yeah, I know they do.
Yeah, right. Like that's what, if you've got one of those, that's the time to sell it, right? One of those weird houses, like it's time to sell it when it's hot. That's why inventory kept falling during the pandemic, because we were buying everything in sight.
Yeah.
So we were even buying the ones that weren't expecting to buy. And it's also why we could look at the average days on market and watch that thing. Normally it might be 70 or 80 days on the market, and suddenly it's, 20 days during the pandemic, because even the houses that have been sitting around for 200 days are now sold. And so, yeah, those absolutely were trends to keep our eye on. And right now, the junkier ones, add to inventory, and so we are getting inventory growth when the market's significantly less hot.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, what else do you want us to know, Mike?
So home prices, median price of the homes that are going into contract right now, this is the homes that people are buying, is $395,000. It's actually 5.7% higher than last year. But what's interesting is only 2% higher than 2 years ago. And so it looks like we're going to get to just past the all-time high, the May peak from 2 years ago in pricing this spring.
This is not adjusted for inflation, right? These are just
nothing. This is not adjusted. It's not seasonally adjusted. We're just tracking, like, these are the homes. Those 65,000 homes were priced at $395,000. There are signals in the data that are less strong about future sales prices than we had a year ago. So looking at the asking prices are up 0% year over year. We track price reductions, so the percentage of homes on the market that have taken price cuts. There are more of those now than a year ago. So
how much?
So 32% of the homes on the market right now have had price cuts.
Right.
Last year, it was like 29% right now. So it's not catastrophic. I think it's normal to have about 30% of homes take a price cut before they sell, but it is notable that it's climbing now. It's notable that the April now is really the highest April we've seen in like a decade. So those are soft-ish signals for future home sales. So a house is on the market now, it doesn't get its offer, it cuts its price, in April, it maybe gets an offer in May, it closes in June. But you can see right now by tracking those, the price cuts data is not skyrocketing.
Mm-hmm.
2 years ago in April, it was starting to skyrocket. We could see exactly what was happening. So
just a word here. Remember, we're talking about the entire country. We are talking about a giant, geographically diverse country, and we're talking about all price segments. So
that's right.
Multi-million-dollar homes to the cheapest starter home or shack, right?
Yeah, you can use as a rule of thumb, about a third take a price cut.
Yeah.
Some markets, like Phoenix, are typically more like 40% take a price cut.
Mm-hmm.
It's more common. There's more inventory. There's more investors. Things like that happen. Some of the chronic shortage California markets is more like 20% take a price cut, but about a third.
Yeah.
And so when more than that are taking a price cut, like that's an indicator of weak demand. And fewer, it's because there's hotter demand. And so right now we can see it's starting to climb. And there are more on the market now with price cuts than any time in the last decade. So it's soft. It's not super strong.
It's soft data because this is a psychology of the seller that is the issue here, right? If the seller's expectations are up in the clouds, it depends where you are in that cycle. Like, is the general mentality of sellers in a more realistic frame at certain times? Or is the general mentality like, oh, my neighbor's house sold, so mine's worth $100,000 more? And
of those that 30%, sometimes it's a crazy seller, sometimes it's strategic, sometimes like there are different reasons that a house might be overpriced and do a price cut. but about a third of them take a cut before they sell. In a hot market, it's fewer than that. The other thing we can see when we're looking at the sales prices here, the price of those contracts is in June and October, September of 22, we could see big steps down in prices. Mm-hmm. And those were the moments when interest rates jumped and consumers stepped back, and we could see the immediate impact on sales prices. And it didn't make it into the headlines until 6 months later. So if rates were to jump right now, the price growth here can drop in a couple of weeks very quickly.
Mike, give out your website. You cater mostly to the real estate community of agents out there that need data for their clients and their sellers. It's always great to have you on. You're just a wealth of information. Go ahead and give out your website if you would.
Yeah, we're Altos Research, altosresearch.com. And, if you need to understand the market and you need to communicate with buyers and sellers about what's happening in the housing market, go to Altos Research. You can book a free consult with our team, and we can show you how to talk about the housing market with home buyers and sellers right now.
With authority.
With authority, with expertise.
Mike Simonsen, thanks always for joining us.
All right, Jason, thanks.